The United States is the worst hit country by COVID-19 pandemic, with the death toll crossing 40,000 and over 750,000 infections. However, people in many states have taken to the streets to protest against the stay-at-home measures imposed by the majority of the state governors. President Donald Trump seems anxious about reopening the businesses and returning to normality, as he tweeted to liberate some states. His tweets have earned him some criticism by some governors, especially Washington's governor, accusing the president of fomenting domestic rebellion and spreading lies. Similar sort of presidential behavior by Jair Bolsonaro can be witnessed in Brazil, where hundreds of people have also protested against the lockdown measures, which have rattled the country's economy. And to talk more about this, we are today joined by Professor Herbert Reginbogin, international law expert from Washington, D.C., and Elizabeth Laura, professor of political science and international affairs at the University of Mary Washington from Virginia. Thank you for your time at Newswire. I'll start the discussion with you, Professor Reginbogin. Protests have been reported in the streets of Ohio, Texas, North Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, and Michigan, with thousands have turned out. How do you think legit are these protests?
They have a constitutional right to protest, but in a state of emergency, which is quasi been called out by their governor, it becomes a question of which right prevails over the other. If this was to be brought before a court, I think that the merits of a state of emergency would prevail. However, that not being the case, and a precedent giving legitimacy for these kinds of actions is almost an incitement of breaking the law. This is still very fluid, but if this continues in a larger form, then I believe there will be legal action taken by the court and by organizations, because this is about the public health.
This is about public health, and if you think that it continues with such type of narrative, there would be a legal action against him in a future. Professor Laura, how legitimate do you think these protests are? It actually owes to the anxiety and the frustration that has been caused among the Americans generally, because there are reports that over 22 million Americans have lost their jobs because of the lockdown measures.
In the United States, we do have a constitutional right to assembly and to express our opinion. So these people showing up for the protests are carrying out their rights. Now, some of the protests have been quite large. In Denver, thousands of people showed up. In Virginia, and in some other states, a handful of people showed up. So when you're talking about demonstrations and protests, they're not all the same. And in some places, actually in many places, these were carried out in cars. People drove their cars and honked their horns to show visibility, and so they could be heard, in the state houses. So they weren't even getting out of their cars. In other places, people were 6 feet apart. And yes, in other places, people were less than 6 feet apart. And that is, a contradiction to what the governors have been saying. But what these people coming out and protesting are saying, and again, they're not really the majority of Americans. I know some polls say about 60% of Americans agree with the decisions of the governors to keep these limits. But these people who are showing up are saying that they're chafing against the powers of the state, and especially the more egregious actions that some state governors have taken, such as you can't go fishing, you cannot be alone in a park or a dog park. It's those kinds of things. And also some of the businesses are saying we are going to lose our livelihoods because your decisions are egregious. That's the primary argument, that the governors have gone too far, not that there is some type of limits at all.